Imagine planning the most important battle of your life with zero technology. No satellites, no drones, not even a decent paper map from REI. Just your eyes, your experience, and the hope that you're reading the ground correctly. In 1260, a general named Qutuz faced exactly this challenge. His enemy, the Mongol army that had conquered from Korea to Poland, that had never lost a major battle in 50 years, but had just destroyed Baghdad and was marching toward Egypt with 20,000 of the finest cavalry on earth. Qutuz had one advantage. He knew something about a valley in Palestine called Ain Jalut. The Mongols didn't. That knowledge would stop the Mongol Empire in its tracks and change the course of world history. A messenger arrives in Cairo in 1260 with news that makes the Sultan's blood run cold. The Mongols have taken Syria. Damascus has fallen. Aleppo is burning. And the Mongol general Kitbuqa is sending envoys to Egypt with a message. It's not a negotiation. It's a threat, written in blood. Submit or face the fate of Baghdad. 2 years earlier, Mongol forces had destroyed Baghdad so thoroughly that the Tigris River ran black with ink from destroyed libraries, then red with the blood of 200,000 dead. The Abbasid Caliphate, which had ruled the Islamic world for 500 years, was erased in a week. Now those same forces were coming for Egypt. Every kingdom that had faced the Mongols had made the same calculation: fight and die, or surrender and maybe live. Qutuz, the Mamluk Sultan of Egypt, made a different calculation. He executed the Mongol envoys, not quietly, not diplomatically. He had them beheaded in the streets of Cairo, and their heads mounted on the city gates. The message was clear: Egypt will fight. But Qutuz understood something crucial about the Mongols. They weren't just skilled warriors. They were strategic geniuses who adapted to every environment they encountered. In China, they learned siege warfare. In Persia, they mastered urban combat. In Hungary, they defeated heavy European cavalry in forests and swamps. The Mongols won because they studied their enemies, exploited weaknesses, and never fought. On because they studied their enemies, exploited weaknesses, and never fought. So how do you defeat an enemy that adapts to everything and chooses its battlefields? Qutuz's answer was revolutionary. You don't let them choose. You pick the battlefield yourself. You understand it better than they do, and you force them to fight where their advantages become weaknesses. The place he chose was a valley in northern Palestine called Ain Jalut, which means Spring of Goliath. The name was prophetic. This would be where a smaller force defeated a giant. The Mamluks themselves were one of history's strangest military forces. Mamluk means owned. In Arabic, they were slave soldiers, boys taken from the steppes of Central Asia and the Caucasus Mountains, converted to Islam, and trained from childhood to be warriors. It sounds like a recipe for an unreliable army. Why would slaves fight for their masters? But the Mamluks weren't ordinary slaves. They formed a military elite, a brotherhood forged through shared training and combat. Many rose to positions of command. Some, like Qutuz, became sultans. They were professional soldiers in an era of feudal levies and tribal warriors. And crucial, many Mamluks came from the same steppes as the Mongols. They knew how steppe cavalry fought because they'd grown up with those tactics. They understood Mongol psychology, Mongol strategies, Mongol weaknesses. If anyone could beat the Mongols at their own game, it was warriors who came from the same background. In August 1260, Qutuz marched north from Egypt with perhaps 20,000 men. The exact number is debated by historians, but the force was roughly equal to the Mongol army. That alone was remarkable. Most kingdoms that faced the Mongols either had massive armies that lacked quality, or small elite forces that were overwhelmed by numbers. Qutuz had achieved parity. With him rode Baibars, one of the most brilliant cavalry commanders of the medieval era. Baibars had escaped Syria when the Mongols invaded. He had personal reasons to hate them. He also had personal knowledge of Syrian geography. He knew every valley, every hill, every water source between Damascus and Egypt. When Qutuz asked where they should meet the Mongols, Baibars had an answer: Ain Jalut. The valley was roughly 60 miles from the Mediterranean coast, in the Jezreel Valley region. It sat along the route the Mongols would likely take to invade Egypt, and it had specific geographical features that could turn Mongol advantages into vulnerabilities. The valley itself was a natural bowl, surrounded by hills covered with vegetation thick enough to conceal troops. The floor was relatively open grassland, perfect cavalry country. To the Mongols, it would look ideal for their tactics, rapid maneuver, feigned retreats, encirclement. They'd fought hundreds of battles on terrain like this, but the hills were close enough that forces hidden there could charge down quickly. The vegetation was dense enough that even large cavalry units could remain unseen until the last moment, and there were limited exits from the valley. Once committed to battle there, retreating would be difficult. The Mongols wouldn't see these disadvantages immediately. They'd see good cavalry ground and make the same tactical decisions that had won them empires. That's what Qutuz was counting on. He was setting a trap that looked like an opportunity. The Mamluk army reached Ain Jalut first. Qutuz positioned the bulk of his forces in the hills, hidden by trees and elevation. He kept only a small force visible in the valley itself, commanded by Baibars. This was the bait. The plan was simple, but required perfect discipline. When the Mongols arrived, Baibars would engage them with his vanguard. He would fight, then retreat, drawing the Mongols deeper into the valley. The Mongols would think they were witnessing a typical rout. They'd pursue exactly as they'd done 1,000 times before. Then, when the Mongol army was fully committed to the valley floor, spread out in pursuit, Qutuz would spring the trap. Hidden forces would charge from the hills, hitting the Mongols from multiple directions simultaneously. It would turn a Mongol pursuit into a Mamluk ambush, but everything depended on timing and discipline. If Baibars retreated too quickly, the Mongols wouldn't commit. If the hidden forces revealed themselves too early, the Mongols would escape. If anyone panicked, the trap would fail. On September 3rd, 1260, the Mongol army arrived at Ain Jalut. Leading them was Kitbuqa, a Nestorian Christian who had served the Mongol Empire for decades. Kitbuqa was experienced, cautious, and very good at his job. He'd commanded in the conquest of Syria. He'd seen every trick enemies used, but he also had political pressures. The main Mongol army had returned to Mongolia after the Great Khan Mongoli. After the Great Khan Mongoli. There was a succession crisis. Kitbuqa's force in Syria was essentially isolated, unsupported by the larger empire. He needed a decisive victory against Egypt to secure Mongol control of the region. When scouts reported a Mamluk force in Ain Jalut, Kitbuqa saw an opportunity. The Mamluks were far from Egypt. If he could destroy them here, Egypt would be defenseless. He ordered his forces into the valley. Baibars waited until the Mongols were close, then attacked. This was critical to the plan. If he'd simply retreated at first sight, the Mongols would have suspected a trap. Instead, he fought genuinely, casualties on both sides, a real engagement that looked like a Mamluk attempt to block the Mongol advance. The fighting was fierce. Mamluk cavalry clashed with Mongol cavalry in the kind of swirling melee both sides excelled at. Arrows filled the air. Horses screamed. Men died. Then Baibars ordered retreat. His forces turned and fled deeper into the valley. To the Mongols, this looked completely normal. They'd seen it hundreds of times. Enemy engages, realizes they're overmatched, breaks and runs. The Mongol response was automatic. Pursue and destroy. Kitbuqa ordered his cavalry forward. The entire Mongol army swept into Ain Jalut in pursuit of what they thought was a beaten enemy. The Mongols spread out as they chased. This was standard tactics. You don't pursue in a tight formation because you're trying to catch fleeing enemies who are scattering. You fan out. You use your mobility. You run down stragglers. Within minutes, the Mongol force had transformed from a concentrated army into dozens of small pursuit groups spread across the valley floor. They were moving fast. They were focused on the enemy ahead, and they had no idea that thousands of Mamluk cavalry were hidden in the hills on both sides of the valley, waiting for the signal. Qutuz watched from the hills. He was timing this perfectly. Wait until they're committed. Wait until they can't easily retreat. Wait until the entire force is in the valley. Sources say Qutuz threw his helmet to the ground and shouted. Waitus was the signal. The trap was sprung. Mamluk cavalry exploded from the hills on both sides of the valley. Thousands of horsemen charging downhill at full speed, hitting the Mongol flanks simultaneously. The effect was devastating. The Mongols weren't in formation. They were scattered, pursuing, unprepared for a sudden attack from their flanks and rear. Individual Mongol units tried to respond, wheeling to face the new threat, but they were outnumbered and disorganized. The tactical situation had reversed in seconds. Suddenly the Mongols weren't the pursuers, they were the pursued. They weren't setting the terms of engagement, they were reacting desperately to an ambush. And Baibars, who'd been retreating, turned his force around and attacked from the front. The Mongols were now surrounded, hit from 3 directions, in broken terrain where their maneuver advantages meant nothing. The battle descended into brutal close-quarters fighting. This was exactly what Qutuz wanted. The Mongols were deadly in open-field warfare, where they could use mobility and archery. But in a chaotic melee where everyone was mixed together, training and individual combat skill mattered more than tactical mobility, and the Mamluks were superbly trained. Years of daily practice with sword, lance and bow. They were professional soldiers fighting the battle of their lives. The Mongols were skilled too, but they were also isolated, surrounded, and increasingly desperate. For hours, the fighting raged across Ain Jalut. The Mongols tried to break out, to reform, to create space for their cavalry tactics to work. The Mamluks pressed them relentlessly, keeping the battle close and chaotic, denying the Mongols any chance to reorganize. Kitbuqa fought like the warrior he was. Sources describe him rallying his men repeatedly, leading charges personally, refusing to retreat. But tactical brilliance couldn't overcome strategic disaster. His army was in the wrong place, in the wrong kind of battle. By late afternoon, the Mongol army was breaking. Units were fleeing independently. The formation had completely disintegrated. Kitbuqa was captured and brought before Qutuz. The Mongol general refused to beg for mercy. He told Qutuz that killing him would bring Mongol vengeance. Qutuz had him executed on the spot. This wasn't cruelty. It was making a statement. Egypt would not be intimidated. The Mamluks pursued the fleeing Mongols for miles. It was a complete rout. Thousands of Mongols died in the battle, or the pursuit afterward. The army that had conquered Syria was destroyed. The immediate aftermath was dramatic. Qutuz recaptured Syria within weeks. The Mongols abandoned their conquests and retreated to Iraq. Baibars, seeing an opportunity, had Qutuz assassinated and made himself sultan. This might seem like a betrayal, but Mamluk politics were brutal. Baibars went on to rule Egypt brilliantly for 17 years, solidifying Mamluk power and ensuring the Mongols never returned. But the real significance of Ain Jalut goes far beyond Egypt or Syria. This was the first time in 50 years that the Mongols had lost a major battle. It proved they could be beaten. It stopped their expansion into Africa and the Middle East. If the Mongols had conquered Egypt, they would have controlled the richest trade routes in the medieval world. They might have pushed into North Africa, potentially even threatening Europe from the south. Ain Jalut prevented all of that. The battle also demonstrated something crucial about military history. Technological and tactical superiority can be overcome by strategic intelligence. The Mongols were better at cavalry warfare than almost anyone. Their tactics were refined over generations. Their soldiers were trained from childhood, but Qutuz understood that tactics operate within strategic contexts. If you can manipulate the strategic context, choose the ground, set the conditions, force the enemy to fight where their advantages don't apply, then tactical superiority becomes irrelevant. Ain Jalut wasn't won by better cavalry tactics. It was won by better understanding of terrain, better strategic planning, and perfect execution of a complex ambush. The Mamluks fought smart, not just hard. There's also a fascinating parallel to the Mongol assassin conflict we discussed earlier. Both the assassins and the Mamluks faced the same Mongol military machine. The assassins relied on fortresses and assassination. When the Mongols adapted and besieged their fortresses systematically, the assassins had no counter-strategy. They lost. The Mamluks, by contrast, engaged the Mongols in the Mongols' own medium-mobile cavalry warfare, but on ground that negated Mongol advantages. They adapted to the Mongols rather than expecting the Mongols to adapt to them. That's why they won. It's a lesson that echoes through military history. You can't beat a superior enemy by letting them fight their fight. You have to change the rules of engagement. Ain Jalut also preserved something incredibly important. The Mamluk Sultanate went on to protect Islamic culture and learning for centuries, while the Mongols had destroyed Baghdad's House of Wisdom with its irreplaceable manuscripts, while they'd burned libraries from China to Persia. the Mamluks preserved knowledge. Cairo became a new center of Islamic scholarship. The geometric patterns in Mamluk architecture, the mathematical advances, the medical texts, all of this survived because Egypt survived. When we talk about Ain Jalut, we're not just talking about a battle, we're talking about the preservation of an entire civilization's intellectual heritage. The Mongols themselves never forgot Ain Jalut. The decades afterward, they attempted to reconquer Syria. They launched invasions in 1281, 1299, 1303. The Mamluks defeated them every time. What had seemed like an unstoppable empire had found its limit. The Mediterranean coast would be the western boundary of Mongol expansion. They went no further. In some ways, Ain Jalut marked the high water mark of Mongol conquest, just as Tours marked the limit of Muslim expansion in Europe in 732, or Vienna marked the limit of Ottoman expansion in 1683. There are moments in history where civilizations collide, and one says to the other, no further. Ain Jalut was one of those moments. Today, the site of Ain Jalut is in northern Israel, near the town of Hifula. There's no monument, no tourist site, just farmland and the same hills that hid Mamluk cavalry 764 years ago. If you visited, you'd see a pleasant valley, good agricultural land, pretty landscape. You wouldn't know that this was where the Mongol Empire's expansion was stopped, where one of history's greatest militaries was defeated by terrain, tactics, and strategic intelligence. That's often how history works. The most important battlefields don't look important. They just look like places. But in 1260, this place changed everything. A Mamluk sultan looked at a valley and saw an opportunity. A Mongol general looked at the same valley and saw good cavalry ground. The difference in how they read that terrain determined which civilization would survive and which would be stopped. The Mamluks read the ground correctly, and that made all the difference. This battle demonstrates something profound about warfare. Technology and training matter, but so does knowledge. The Mongols had the best cavalry in the world, the most experienced commanders, the most successful military system ever created, but they didn't have what Qutuz had, intimate knowledge of that specific valley. They didn't understand how the hills could hide whole armies, how the terrain could turn pursuit into ambush, how their tactical advantages would evaporate in that particular ground. Qutuz did, and that knowledge, carefully applied with precise timing and iron discipline, beat the best army in the world. It's a reminder that in any conflict, in any competition, knowing the ground, understanding the context you're operating in better than your opponent does, can be the deciding factor. The Mongols conquered empires, but at Ain Jalut, local knowledge defeated imperial power, and the Mongol advance stopped forever in a valley whose name most people have never heard.